All right, I think we are up and running as I got something in my eye. And I'm hearing lots of different things going on. Okay, I think I've got it. For Pete, bear with me. I am missing, I usually have two screens going and I can split stuff up and look at everything that's happening. And I left my other one at my office. So I only have one and it's super confusing for me right now, but I think I've got it. I also briefly saw what I thought was a wizard run by, but I think that was just my spouse. I like it cold in the house. So um she's just all cloaked up and hooded up. She's kind of hanging out in the other room. So, welcome everybody to Parents Helping Parents Live. It's a happy holiday Monday. Hopefully, you've been off work, you're well rested, and you're ready to fully engage in a beautiful lecture and discussion about trauma and its effect on adolescence and addiction. So, thanks for joining us. If you've never been on before, my name's Derek. I have the privilege of being able to host these live streams for Parents Helping Parents. And if you're not familiar with Parents Helping Parents, we're an Oklahoma City-based nonprofit organization founded by parents, for the most part, run by parents, with the mission of sharing experience, connecting people with resources, and providing education for families who have a child any age that's struggling with a substance use disorder. So we serve parents who have young people who may be 13, 14, 15, who are just starting to experiment with drugs and alcohol. We serve parents who have children who might be 30, 40, 50, well into late stage addiction, who are still trying to deal with those issues as they come up. So if you find yourself being in a family like that, you're in the right spot. If you find yourself just wanting to know more about addiction, wanting to know more about family systems, wanting to know more about how to engage conversations about hope and healing our community, that's great too, because we love to talk about all those things and they're a big part of what we do. So if you want more information about Parents Helping Parents and you want to stay connected with all the wonderful things we're up to and all the partnerships that we've developed in different communities across Oklahoma and our part of the country, I would encourage you to follow and check out our Facebook page at Parents Helping Parents Inc. If you're watching it on our Facebook page, you might be thinking, well, yeah, duh, that's how I saw this video. But we post this on YouTube. The video gets shared lots of places. And so people might be coming across this video who actually don't follow our page. So that's where you can check us out and get more information. You can also find us at our new website at Parents Helping, or www.parentshelpingparents.info. If you want to check us out on the web there. So Facebook's probably the best place to get connected. That's where you're going to see all the upcoming posts and all the upcoming activities that we've got going on. So we always like to give a disclaimer. As an organization, Parents Helping Parents has no professional expertise or experience. We've only walked in the shoes of a loved one and a family member. And so our mission and what we do is really geared toward sharing those experiences, connecting people with resources, and providing some education. Now, we do have the opportunity to bring in people with professional experience, like some of the wonderful speakers that we have join us on Parents Helping Parents Live, but we just don't want anybody to be confused. This isn't some sort of substitute for professional care. This isn't a substitute for therapy or medical advice or legal advice. We think all of those things are wonderful, and we think that if you need those in your family, you should seek them. That's just not what we do as an organization. We're the people that try to connect you with local resources in your area to get those needs met. So as you're watching tonight, do a couple of things for me. I'll remind you again here in a second, but go ahead and reach over, click the share button to share this feed on your timeline. That will just exponentially increase the number of people that we can reach with the message. It's free. It costs you nothing to share the video. And even if you only have, and I think this is a pretty low estimate for people these days, even if you only have 200 or 250 friends on Facebook, that's potentially 250 people that could be exposed to this message that might not otherwise be exposed. And based on what we know about research and about statistics, somebody on your friends list has a family member who is struggling with substance use disorders, or is friends with a family member who is struggling with substance use disorders. So share the video. It's easy, it's free. It can literally change a life. You never know. Somebody might watch this on your news feed And it's the thing that connects them to wanting to change, connects that family to a resource that allows somebody to come out of their addiction and find sobriety and find recovery. So I think that about covers it. Oh, how do you interact tonight? It's a great question. Thanks for asking that, Shelby. She didn't really ask that. I'm just throwing it out there. So there's two different ways you can interact with us, and you can ask questions to Shelby, our wonderful speaker, who I will introduce here in a moment. One of those is you can ask those in the live feed on Facebook. I will be monitoring those. I'm looking at it right now, the bottom right corner of my screen. So if you've got questions, if you've got comment, please share them there. Just remember that that's the internet. That will be there for all time. Hundreds of thousands of years from now, when the monkeys have taken over, just like in Planet of the Apes, and they're digging through the archives of our information, they will find your comment and your question on this video. So if you're worried about your anonymity, if you're worried about your privacy and you don't want to comment there, we have a private way to do that. And the title of this video is a phone number. That phone number is a Google text line that we have available specifically for these live streams. Shoot me over a text message to that number. We will answer your question privately without using your name. You don't even have to put your name in it. And then at the end of the talk, we delete all those messages. They'll never be seen again. So those are kind of the two ways that you guys can interact. Remember, if you haven't yet, click over, hit the share button on the video. That would be fantastic. And I say we get to the meat and potatoes of this deal. So Shelby Howland has graciously decided to join us tonight. Shelby is an LPC that primarily works with adolescents and families at the Virtue Center here locally in the metro area. So I'm gonna unmute you, Shelby, or ask you to unmute, I think is how you have to do it. I'm gonna pass that over to her. She's got some wonderful material prepared for us, and then I'll pop back in for some discussion towards the end. So Shelby, the floor is all yours.
Cool. Well, I'm going to share my screen with everybody. Give me 1 second. So like Derek said, I work, I'm an LPC, and I work with adolescents at the Virtue Center, which is an outpatient substance abuse counseling center. And I thought I would talk about something that I'm pretty passionate about, which is how trauma and substance use disorders kind of go hand in hand. So some quick facts, just to start things off. Specifically, adolescents that struggle with a substance use disorder are 3 times more likely to experience traumatic events. And of those 3 times more likely, 5 times more likely to develop PTSD. We'll talk more about those 2 things in a minute. But if an adolescent has a substance use disorder and PTSD, statistics have showed that they have a higher severity with their substance use. So meaning like you can have a mild, a moderate, or a severe substance use disorder. They are more likely to have that severe one. A very popular thing going around is a lot of people are talking about the ACEs study. And actually, if you go to any mental health facility in the state of Oklahoma that is contracted with DMH or Department of Mental Health, you are asked these questions if you're 18 or older. It is a requirement. So whether you know it or not, you could have taken this. But it is called the Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's 10 questions that there has been done a lot of research on. And the main thing that they look at, or the thing that they do look at, is traumatic experiences that have happened in childhood. And so if you look at this, the top right of the graphic there, it kind of shows you the questions that they ask about. So they ask about abuse, neglect, and then household dysfunction. Household dysfunction can be anything from having a parent incarcerated, having mental illness within the household, somebody else uses substances, any domestic violence, even things like divorce. All of these things can affect children pretty exponentially at a young age. So the more that you have of these, the greater risk that you have for some of these things on the bottom right hand of this graphic. So things like that can affect your physical health, like cancer, heart disease, stroke, things that could affect your mental health, depression, anxiety, all different kinds of things. And then they can also increase your risk for substance use. So alcohol, drugs, things like that. Actually, if we look at on the left side of this graphic on the bottom, under household dysfunction, actually the highest one there is substance use. So it's pretty prevalent. And that's why we see a lot of, if there's substance use in the household, it's a greater risk for that child to have problems with substances. There was actually one study done that showed Oklahoma as having the highest ACE scores. Now there's a couple of different studies that show other states that have them, but this is a pretty big problem for Oklahoma specifically. So that's good knowledge to have and let us be aware of that. This also tells us that substance prevention for somebody that has had trauma, just regular substance prevention, like, hey, don't do this because it's going to affect your liver later on in life or whatever it is. That's less likely to help people if they've been through some traumatic things like this. So we need to address the trauma and the substance use. I found one study that even said, quite shockingly, that for every additional ACE score, the rate of number of prescription drugs used increased by 62%, which is an astounding number. So there's lots of studies if you want to, Google. They have a YouTube video that's pretty good about the ACEs, and it tells so much information. So I also wanted to hit on what exactly trauma can look like. So let's look at that. Specifically with children, I know Parents Helping Parents, we're talking about adult children sometimes too, but my specialty is adolescents. So what I see in kids and teens is that a lot of times they tell us that something is wrong through their behaviors rather than words. Like if you ask a kid, what's going on, they might say, oh, my tummy hurts, or I'm sweating a lot, but they won't have the words to say or the knowledge to say I'm anxious yet. So if you have younger kids, sometimes they're going to tell us what's wrong through their actions rather than describing it. So here are some things that as an adolescent counselor, I get parents coming in and saying kind of all the time, like, what's wrong with my kid? They're lazy, they're unmotivated, they're disrespectful. And I'm sure some of that is true. But if they have experienced trauma, then some of these behaviors might not be just that forefront that's coming out. So if we look at things through a trauma lens, what are those things saying to us? So manipulation. Sometimes that could be getting my needs met in ways that have worked in the past, doing whatever is necessary to survive, rather than trying to get my way. Maybe I'm just trying to survive the day. Lazy. Maybe instead of being lazy, I'm overwhelmed. I'm lacking the skills to make decisions. So looking at these things through a trauma lens, rather than just seeing these negative behaviors, is going to make a world of difference too. Maybe their behaviors are telling you something more. The disrespectful one really got me. Maybe they're feeling threatened, unsafe, or out of control. Maybe they're not meaning to be disrespectful, but they feel unsafe. So it's coming off like that. So I did want to hit on some PTSD symptoms. Now, not everybody who experiences traumatic events is going to develop PTSD. But it's important to know what you're looking for. And I also wanted to put this part on the right here. because a lot of people don't know that you don't have to be exposed to something to develop PTSD. And this is really important to family members of people that struggle with addiction, because sometimes you're that second bullet point right there. You might not have directly experienced it, but you might have witnessed it. You might have witnessed your child overdose. You might have witnessed your child get put into a bad situation where they experience trauma. And then there's that feeling of helplessness. So it could be any one of those four things, either direct exposure, a witness to trauma, even learning about something that a loved one has been exposed to can lead to PTSD. And then the last one there, indirect exposure to adverse details of the trauma. So those would be things like firefighters, policemen, people that are interacting that see traumatic things through their work, people like counselors who have to even hear about traumatic events all the time. That's something to be aware of, because that's very real. So here's what we need to look out for. So distressing memories or dreams, having nightmares, remembering distressing things about that traumatic event, physical and or emotional reactions. So have you noticed that you're sweating a lot more? Have you noticed that your heart beats pretty fast when you think about stuff like that? Or do you notice that your kid is extra moody when you bring up a certain topic? Are they avoiding internal or external reminders? I've worked with people before who, they couldn't walk down a certain street because there was something traumatic that happened to them there. So now they take a completely different route because they don't want to go down that street and have that reminder. So that's avoiding an external reminder. Avoiding internal reminders. So avoiding certain thoughts or memories because they remind you of that experience. Also, strong negative feelings. Sometimes teenagers can be a little moody, a little negative. But is that them being a teenager, or is that them displaying some of these symptoms? It's a good thing to look into. Symptoms of depression or anxiety. Lots of people don't know that either, is that yes, depression and anxiety is very common, but they are also symptoms of PTSD, being unmotivated, not wanting to get up and do things, being hyper vigilant, so always feeling on edge. Sometimes I try to describe it to my teenagers as the game of perfection, but I'm aging myself a little bit there. So if you all remember that game where you try to put the shapes of pieces in before the timer runs out and then it explodes in your face, that was not my favorite game. But that is how people with PTSD feel all the time. So very on edge, waiting for something to happen. They can have increased risky behaviors. So is your child going out and doing things out of the norm that they normally wouldn't do? Are they drag racing down the highway? Are they experimenting with different kinds of drugs? Whatever it might be, that might be a display of that symptomology as well. And then lastly, trouble with concentrating and trouble with sleep. Sometimes ADHD and PTSD can look very similar to each other. They can present kind of the same way. So it's important to get professional help and ask someone that is a mental health professional, hey, if you think something is going on, could it be trauma? Could it be ADHD? Could it be depression, something else? It's important that we figure those things out. So this is the cycle that we see pretty often. And I really like to explain this to my clients and parents of my clients, is that with trauma and PTSD, with trauma and addiction, they're this cycle that kind of never ends. I kind of explain it as the Was it the chicken or the egg first kind of thing? We don't really know. And that's the same with trauma and addiction. So if we start over here, we can either have, firstly, drug or alcohol use, which then can produce fear and anxiety, different emotions because our chemicals are getting imbalanced in our brain. It can release endorphins and dopamine, the things that make us feel good. Then that goes away. And then we experience some trauma. So if it's the drugs and alcohol first, well, you're going to experience some kind of trauma from that. Even if it's things as little as weed, and I put that in quotations because a lot of kids come to me and say, well, I'm not doing the hard stuff, I'm just using weed. Well, yeah, but I've had kids come in and say, I needed to get that and I'm not old enough to go buy it. So I got it from someone else and they were put in kind of a sticky situation where their life could have been in danger. And so that's now a traumatic experience that they've had because of their substance use. So that happens. They don't know how to deal with that trauma. They seek an escape. And what do? They use more drugs and alcohol because they don't know how to deal with it. Or the latter is that they've experienced some trauma already. They've already come in with that. And they started using drugs and alcohol, maybe as experimentation, just to see what it was. Turns out it's a really good coping skill. It's not a good coping skill, but that's what they think. And it makes things go away for a moment. So they start doing that. And then from using that, they get put in that situation where more trauma is happening. And so it's this cycle that just never ends. And that's why we have to address the trauma. That's why when people come into our agency, that's one of the first things that we ask them about. We give them 2 trauma screenings because we want to know what we need to help them with in order to stop this cycle. So now that I've kind of put all this depressing information out there, are we doomed? No, we are not doomed. We actually have these things called protective factors. And so these are things that are going to help us battle all of those negative outcomes that we saw earlier on that graphic. So a couple of these things are social emotional competence. So a lot of people are like, Shelby, what the heck is that? I have no idea. So I kind of break it down as social, talking, emotions, know what those are, competence, having knowledge and understanding of something. So if you can understand and talk about your emotions, then that's already getting you ahead of the game there. If you know what you're feeling and you can express that to somebody and talk about it, then that's going to help out so much. Concrete support in times of need. So if you have a kid that, let's say they get themselves into a sticky situation and they end up at a party or a friend's house and people are using drugs there, do they have somebody that they can call and feel safe enough to call to say, hey, I don't want you to be mad. I found myself here. I don't want to partake in this. Can you come pick me up? That's the kind of support that they need. They also need social supports. So a really big part of us at the Virtue Center is that we strongly recommend group therapy. And that's because you need other people that can relate to you, that know that similar struggle, that have that perspective that maybe that counselor doesn't. We can talk about the trauma and things that have gone on in your life, but your counselor may or may not be able to relate to some of the things that you're going through. And you wouldn't know because they don't disclose that information. So it's important to have those supports. Also, if we're talking about children specifically, knowledge of parenting and child development. So the things that we're talking about now, do you know what to look for? Do you know what kind of development your child is going through right now with their brain? So I wanted to put a little bit of that in here. So I don't know if you know what's going on in the teenage brain right now, but there is a reason that they cannot make good decisions at their age. So I kind of explain this process with animals. So forgive me, I'm a child therapist. But our amygdala is our part of the brain that controls our emotions and our fight or flight. So it's kind of described as a guard dog. So is this situation safe? Do we need to run from it? Do we need to just stay right here, freeze? Do we need to fight in this situation? That gets activated. And then if we're thinking logically, it will go to our prefrontal cortex, which is that front part right here. And I describe it as your wise owl. So that's the part of the brain that makes good decisions, wise choices. It's very logical. The opposite of our amygdala / guard dog. And then we have our hippocampus. And I have a little elephant there because elephants have really good memories. And that's what our brain does in that part of it. So the hippocampus does all of our short and long-term memories, and it helps us learn. So I put this in here because when you're a teenager and your brain is developing and processing, that owl right there, that front part, is what's growing. And so when you're a teenager, you just don't have those skills yet. It's still growing, it's still developing. You're not able to make good decisions sometimes. If you've ever asked a teenager, like, why did you do that? And they go, I don't know. They really don't know because they really didn't think about it. So yeah, some of that is a little bit extra frustrating when you have a teenager, and sometimes even when you have an adult, because when you're using substances at such a young age and you continue to use them, then it delays that process. So maybe you have adults that are in that same boat where that frontal part of the brain is just not fully developed or has delayed in that process. Something I always talk to my clients about too is not only the ACEs, but the PACEs. So these are 10 questions, yes or no, just like the ACEs, but it takes into account for the things that will help you battle trauma or positives in children's lives. So, did you have somebody who loved you unconditionally? Did you have at least one best friend, somebody that you could tell everything to and that you could trust fully? Did you do things regularly to help others? Were you part of like volunteering in some aspect? Were you involved in any kind of sports? Sports are great for kids. Teaches them a lot of like teamwork, responsibility, things like that. Were you an active member of one non-sports group, getting involved in your community? Did you have a hobby that you really engaged in? One stable adult that is not your parent that you could absolutely count on? Was your home clean, safe? Did it have enough food? Were the rules fair within your home? Lots of kids will say no, but take that with a grain of salt. And did you have enough academic resources that were needed and available to you? So studies have also shown that even if you have a really high ACE score, if you have a high PACE score, then that's going to balance things out. You're going to be less likely to experience some of those negative outcomes that we saw on that very first graphic. Now, on the opposite end of that, if we have no trauma, no yeses on those 10 questions at first, but we also have no yeses on the PACEs, then that puts people just as at risk as it does if they were to have a lot of ACE scores and no PACE scores, which is kind of interesting. So get your kids involved in groups and things like that. So a lot of people are like, this is great information, but what do I do with this? How do I help my kids? So something that we talk about specifically I use cognitive behavioral therapy a lot, so that's what I'm just using here. So the first thing that we want to do is look at our thinking. Are we thinking through trauma lenses? Are we just looking at their behavior and writing it off, getting annoyed with it, or are we actually trying to understand what that behavior tells us? Also, this is a really hard skill, but trying not to personalize events. So just because your child does something doesn't mean that you aren't doing enough, if that makes sense. Like if your child has behaviors that look negative, that doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. Other things is recognizing your own feelings. Many times we have moms or dads or parents come in and their whole entire focus is on their child and helping them get better, but they're neglecting themselves. So as important as it is for us to help them, it's just as important to recognize our own feelings and know what we're going through, because you can't help them if you're not able to recognize your own stuff that's going on. Also important to realize your strengths. So it can be very easy to just pick out the negative things and what we're not doing right. But even if things are not turning out how we want them to turn out, or how we wish that our children would be doing, we have to recognize the things that we are doing and our strengths with them. And then lastly, this is a really big one that a lot of people struggle with, but I have parents come in and maybe sometimes there was trauma in their family early on and they feel guilty because of that trauma. So instead of having really good boundaries, like that second bullet point, now they're kind of parenting out of guilt. So they're trying to make up for lost times. They're trying to kind of be their friend rather than a parent, and kind of saying like, you know, this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for X, Y, and Z that happened in the past, and I let that happen. So now I'm going to just give my kid whatever they want so that I can kind of make up for that. But that actually does not help them at all. So keeping strong boundaries, sometimes letting them experience those negative experiences from their substance use is going to be a really beneficial part to things. And that's really, really hard to do. But in the long run, it's going to help them out more than just giving in. So we want to prevent a lot of codependency behaviors, because it's not going to help anybody. And again, I know that it's really, really hard, but it is something that we have to look out for. So one of my things is, let's provide resources rather than bailouts. So instead of bailing my kid out every time they get in trouble at school, hey, why don't you call up the Virtue Center? They have a group that can reduce your suspension if you go. So go and learn about how substance use is not great for teenagers, instead of me trying to bail you out for things like that. Also, you're not responsible for others' choices, actions, wants, needs, well-being, or lack of well-being. Even if it's your kids, you are not responsible for it. You're called to be a parent and not a superhero. So you don't have to try to save them from everything. I know some parents are like, yeah, but I don't want my kid to experience anything bad. Well, we're going to eventually. So, you know, sometimes we need to experience those negative things. Sometimes that's going to help us out more so than, you know, having everything covered up and having all these bailouts and the world provided to us, so to say. Also, to remember that their success rate or lack of success is not an indication of your parenting abilities. And again, that's a hard one to take into account, but teenagers do what they want. kids do what they want. So yes, we can be there to guide them, but in the end, that's their choice if they want to take your advice or not. Some really common trauma coping techniques that I just wanted to go over at the very end here, so that maybe you can help them out with your kids if they ask. Some grounding techniques. So a really common one is the 5 senses, and you count them on your hands. So 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can smell. No, wait, it's 4 that you can touch. Anyways, you can look it up, but it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So doing things like that, or taking a drink of water, being very conscious of it going down, things like that, to just stabilize your body. Journaling is also a big one. I know that not everybody's into that, but it is really helpful and beneficial to express yourself on paper, especially if your kid doesn't have anybody to talk to. Start there. Tell it to a journal. Remembering HALT. This is a big one. So HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. So it's important to ask these things to yourself when you're feeling kind of off. Are you hungry? When's the last time that you ate? Are you drinking enough water? Because those things can affect our mental health too. Am I angry? Who am I mad at? Why am I mad? What's going on? Lonely. Are you isolating? Are you staying away from people? Are you socializing with your friends? Why or why not? And then tired. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you going to bed at a decent time? What's going on? Practicing mindfulness and meditation. So being very aware of what's going on around you. Sometimes like nature walks help people. Just being very, very aware, I guess. And then having a safety plan if it needs to get to that level. You know, who can I call if I'm feeling triggered to use? What resources do I have that are out there? What coping skills do I have that I can write out and look? Because when we're having a moment of crisis, then we're not going to be thinking logically like we normally would. So having them out on paper really helps. So, you know, maybe I like to express myself through art. Maybe I like to listen to music, but having that on paper is going to help me. And then lastly, utilizing 988, which is brand new. It just came out in July. And it is the crisis hotline. So whenever you call that, you'll be connected to a licensed counselor. And it's not just for suicidal thoughts. It's also, you know, if you're having some kind of mental health crisis or complete addiction crisis. So you're welcome to call there, or other resources. I know specifically that we actually, if we have somebody that's in a crisis and they call us, then we get them connected to a counselor, and a counselor talks to them right there. So just be aware of what all is around you and the resources that can help. There's my references. The last thing that I want to say is specifically with the Virtue Center. It's a good reference if you're in the Norman area for adolescents. All of our treatment is free for anyone that's under 21. And we actually don't have to have parent consent if they're 14 or older. So if you know an adolescent that's like, man, I'm really struggling with something, but I don't want my parents to know, we legally cannot tell them if they're 14 or older, because that would be a HIPAA violation. So pretty cool stuff. Adults can also get services as low as $4. But other than that, if you have any questions, let me know.
Man, Shelby, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm really glad that you went ahead and covered like how to get in touch with the Virtue Center and what that looks like, because that was going to be the first thing that I had you do. So I'm going to be real honest. I took some notes, Exhibit A, as you were talking, of just some of the things that you were saying, maybe that I had questions about.
Okay.
And as you were talking, you began to answer all the things that I had written down. So you did a great job covering. Like I loved what you said, really towards the beginning about, and you said specifically with adolescence, but that all behavior has meaning and that behavior is oftentimes deeper than just what it looks like on the surface level. And what I thought was, man, that's true even for adults, who are engaging in addictive behaviors or compulsive behaviors or obsessions or whatever it might be. So I really enjoyed that. You also talked about looking through the trauma lens, and I actually made a note. It was kind of a snarky question, but I think you went ahead and covered it, but I'll ask it anyway, is that as we begin to look through all of this stuff through a trauma lens, does that mean that we all of a sudden don't have to have boundaries? If it's like, oh, it's because they've experienced trauma, it's fine. Like they're just
Right.
they're victims. like how do you find that balance between erring on that too far end, right?
Sure. So it's important to recognize, but if we recognize it, that doesn't mean it excuses it. So it's important for us to know that that might be the behavior that's caused from trauma. But even if you've experienced trauma and you're exhibiting those behaviors, your trauma doesn't excuse things from consequences, which is what I talk to my clients a lot about. So yes, you might have experienced something really bad that has happened, and yes, it might affect you, but that doesn't mean that you get to go around and do whatever you want because you have experienced, and you can't use that as an excuse. That's why you're here, and that's why you're healing from it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That's why I asked it. I had another boundaries kind of related question. Let me find it. Maybe not. What would you say is, like on a scale of 1 to 10, the family's risk factor of secondary traumatic stress if you've got a family member who's struggling with a substance use disorder or significant mental illness?
It really depends on the person. I would say it's going to be higher if you don't figure that out quickly, and your risk that's at it. So if you push it off and you don't address it, then you're more likely going to develop it. But if you kind of see what's going on and you're like, man, I don't want this to develop into something more, catching it earlier on is going to be better for you. So I don't know if that exactly answers the question.
Yeah, no, for sure. I just wanted the families to know that that's the real deal. Like you've got a difficult task of being the caregiver of somebody that's struggling. And if you don't engage early, right, and often in developing and boosting your own protective factors, that you're going to be in a world of hurt if you wait too long, right?
Yeah, like I've seen parents have such bad physical symptoms from having that codependency and trying to like save their kids from their addiction, and they've forgotten about themselves, and they've had, thousands of dollars for medical bills because they're just not taking care of themselves.
Yeah. It's so funny how many people I talk to that are experiencing chronic pain, GI issues, tension, all these type things, and then you start talking to them and it's like, yeah, none of that's medical, man. That's all psychosomatic stuff that if you got emotionally healthy, you might not feel those ways, right? Yeah. I got one more question, but I want to comment on something you said that I've never heard phrased this way, and I loved it. I actually wrote it, so I have a notebook that I keep scrap notes on, but this is my very important permanent notes. I wrote it in there, so that's how you know I really liked it. I was like, oh, that's going in the permanent notebook. You were talking about having boundaries, not being codependent, and letting people experience the natural consequences of their actions. And then you said one really easy way to do that is to remember to give people resources, not bailouts. And I thought that's great, because that's actually, that can help you feel like you're fulfilling the need that you have to do something because you care about somebody, but it's staying well on the healthy side of a codependent and a boundary line. So yeah, thought that was great.
Thanks.
Hey, I've got one more question. I ask it to everybody that comes on. If you had to give like a 30-second, 60-second message of hope, maybe to somebody who's watching this that might really be struggling, or to a family member that's got somebody in it that's really struggling, like what would just that simple 30-second message of hope be?
30 seconds of hope. Pressure's on.
Right?
Nobody's broken. You can always heal from anything that you've been through. One of the common things that I like to say to people is that even if you've experienced some sort of trauma, it might leave a scar, but it's not going to leave that wound that's oozing there. So, you know, you might have that imprinted on you for the rest of your life, but it can heal. It just probably won't look the same as it did before. Yeah,
it's good. It's good. You rose to the occasion. You were worried about answering that question. It was great. Hey, Shelby, man, thanks for being here. It's a holiday. You could have been doing 1,000 different things. I think there's Monday Night Football even going on tonight. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. Thanks to everybody else that joined us. Hopefully it was worth your while.
Thanks for having me.
All right, signing off. We'll see you, Shelby. Bye.
See ya.